The 1997 video game Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back is one of my favorites from the PS1 era. And even all these years later, this one is still entertaining. This is a nice platformer video game because I remember how much I had played this as a kid. And I recently went back and replayed the first 5 levels, and I have to say, it's just as enjoyable now as it was back then. So, taking place a year after the events of the previous installment, Dr. Neo Cortex ends up teleporting Crash Bandicoot to a warp room and lies to him saying that the world is in danger. He also tells him we need 25 crystals in order to save the world. And Crash Bandicoot, being a character that's not too smart, especially trusting his nemesis, who tried to kill him might add in the first video game, he ends up going to these areas in order to retrieve the crystals. And well, from there is a video game that, well, is light on the story. The fun factor really are the playable levels. Like, growing up playing this, I had this game when I was a kid. And every time I would play it, I would just be having a fun time. Sure, the level variety isn't that great, and the boss fights are way too simple. In fact, this game is easier compared to the previous installment, and even though it does get challenging at times, it's not as frustrating compared to the first game. The graphics look better, the music is great, and while the story is pretty weak by today's standards, this game did come out in the late 90s, so the story wasn't the best when it came to these platformer video games. Now, new characters such as Dr. Engine and Tiny Tiger, they will have big appearances later on in this franchise, and the Komodo brothers, they wouldn't have much of a large presence after this installment. Nonetheless, while this one does have its issues, it is my favorite game in the Crash franchise, and certainly it is so enjoyable that it's a game that anybody could play no matter what their age is. The late 1990s were an interesting time for platformers. You had the hit classic Banjo-Kazooie, the Mega Man video games from the arcade series, and then you had, well, this game. This was always a key character for Sony to latch onto and build a franchise off of. Now sure, the gameplay mechanics are outdated by today's standards, and the boss fights are way too easy. But one of the worst things this video game did is the end boss fight with Dr. Neo Cortex. I must say it took a long time replaying that one because let me tell you, it's one of the worst boss fights of all time. I mean, Crash Bandicoot is chasing him through the asteroid field, and Dr. Cortex is just, flying away. He doesn't even shoot back at Crash Bandicoot. I'm like, man, whoever designed this, they really didn't put the emphasis that this was the final boss. I mean, I don't hate it. Alright, what am I saying? I absolutely don't like that boss fight. It sucks. But more importantly, I like what this game did, improving the graphics a little bit. And then getting a insane trilogy that came out back in 2017, which I haven't played, but I heard the only thing that game does is, well, improve graphics and gameplay mechanics. I don't know, this one has always been one of my favorite Crash Bandicoot games of all time. It's always been interesting despite the issues that it has, and it has aged like fine wine. I mean, this video game came out the same year of other classics such as Gran Turismo, GoldenEye, 007, or even Final Fantasy. Like, this one still stands above its predecessor, but not changing too much to the formula where it's, unlikable. Sure, this game probably could have Crash talking, but then that's not the character. Just like how Link never talked in the video games he was in. At the end of the day, if you somehow missed this one when it had came out all those years ago, or if you want to check out the recent video game trilogy that came out a couple of years back, then certainly check this one out because it is well worth the effort. I'm giving this video game an 8 out of 10. A fun platformer that is still enjoyable even more than 2 decades later. This one has a special place in my heart just because of how nostalgic it is, how it brings back all those great memories I had playing this as a kid. And while this video game isn't great by today's standards, it's reminiscent of a bygone era in video gaming. Unlike today, there wasn't online gaming or Xbox achievements for that matter, among other things. One thing I wanted to point out is that if you collect all 42 gems, then you get the true ending to this game, which actually adds replay value to this one. At the end of the day, a good video game despite some of the issues that it does have. And that's my review of Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back. Alright, leave your comments down below in the section and let me know what you think about this video game. My review of Crash Bandicoot Warp will be happening sometime in the future. And that's going to be an interesting one to get to because I always consider that game one of the strongest entries in the franchise. But for some of the later entries, well, they weren't as good as they should have been. Okay, this is Slim Guy 172 saying, peace out.